we'll get to those at the end today. And the reason being, I just am not able to see them when I start presenting, but we're certainly going to try to get to them at the end today. So with that, thank you for joining us tonight for our Intro to Fruit Tree Pruning class. My name is Grant McCarty. I'm a local foods and small farms educator that serves the Daviess-Stephenson and Winnebago counties with University of Illinois Extension. I am up in northern Illinois. I'm about 8 miles to Wisconsin state line, and got about 6 inches of snow that came today. I think a lot of us got some snow too. I'm going to briefly turn on my video just so you can kind of see who your presenter is. I'll turn it back off, but I'll turn it on at the end when we answer some of those questions you have. We certainly have gotten a lot of good feedback that this Intro to Fruit Tree Pruning class has been very popular, and appreciate those who sent photos to be incorporated in today's presentation. For those that are still interested, you're more than welcome to send photos to me, and I will send those back to you with some coloring that I do when it comes to determining what to prune and what to leave behind. But certainly appreciate you all joining us tonight for today's presentation. So today's plan, one of it's going to just be getting started, especially as we think about an introduction to fruit tree pruning. I'm expecting that maybe you have not pruned ever, or maybe you haven't pruned in the last couple of years. Perhaps you've purchased property and you have now found that you have fruit trees on your property and you just don't know what to do with them. I also create this course as one that maybe you're planning to plant this upcoming growing season, and you now kind of want to know what you're getting yourself into when it comes to pruning those trees. I'm in a little bit of a similar boat. I planted some peach trees this past spring. Now I'm figuring out and determining how I want to prune these as I go along into the next couple of years. So we'll get into kind of the basics of it, some of the things that, questions that arise when I teach this class to make sure that you have those answers as you leave tonight. We'll get into a lot of those general cuts, some of the cuts that you should expect to prune on your tree every season and every year so that it gets in kind of the best shape it can be. You're going to see a lot of examples tonight, and some of those examples come from participants in tonight's class that have submitted photos, but a lot of them are actually going to come from my family. My family has a very small orchard in Tennessee with about 65 fruit trees that were planted in the 1980s. And these have been neglected and really have started to get some more attention in the last couple of years with a bit more of robust pruning. So I created this class, and I come from a place of being potentially in the same situation you're in, where we have fruit trees that have not been pruned in years and are beginning that process of determining what we need to do. And that's what you see in this photo. This is Virginia Beauty. It's a great apple, and yet it has some pruning needs, as you can certainly tell from looking at this photo. We'll get into next cuts. So thinking that, okay, you're pruning in 2020. Now, what do you need to look for when it comes to the growing season this upcoming year? Or even thinking about, what will the pruning look like in 2022, as well as in you with some resources. So some pruning basics to get going tonight. It's really important to know the tree. That is really going to ensure that you're pruning things correctly, you're pruning things as they should be. A lot of what you'll hear tonight is talking about the different heights, but certainly a semi-dwarf tree is going to be pruned slightly different than we might prune, say, a standard tree. For reference, a standard tree would be one that we might see reaches maturity 25, 30 feet tall. Certainly we see standard trees much taller than that. A dwarf tree, we typically see it reach maturity at a height of about 10 to 12 feet. And then a semi-dwarf tree is those that's getting probably between 14 to 16 feet tall. And those will all be pruned a little bit different, but similar concept and similar basics. Know that what we're talking about a lot of tonight is going to be a central leader style. And this is great for apples and pears. It could also work for peaches and other stone fruit that you might encounter too. And the central leader style tends to be a little bit like a Christmas tree shape. So if you're very familiar with how that Christmas tree shape looks, that's really what we're talking about when it comes to a central leader style. I'll mention a bit Espalier design, which is what you see here in this photo. whereas that could work for apples and pears, perhaps too. When it comes to our stone fruit group, this is peaches, this is cherry, this is apricots. These are what we call kind of a compass, an open fruit bowl, kind of a vase shape. They do really well with this design and this shape. But as mentioned, they could also be fine with a central leader style. So when to prune? When are you going to do any sort of pruning? In Northern Illinois, we typically recommend pruning between mid-December to March 1st. We are in planting zone 5A, planting zone 5B. You may find, depending on where you're located, that this doesn't necessarily work for you, but in general, we're talking about pruning during dormancy. So if you're more aware of when your fruit tree is in dormancy, that's really what we're talking about when it comes to pruning. So for Northern Illinois, this is about mid-December to about March 1st. And really, we're looking at maybe in the next 6 to 8 weeks, a little bit less than that, is when we're going to be doing our pruning. I've placed an asterisk here because depending on the season, you may be able to actually push some of your pruning into the month of March. I don't think I would push it all the way to the end of March, but I would certainly, potentially, you might be able to make it into mid-March. How much are you actually going to prune? This, I think, is where people get a little bit annoyed that you can't take everything out. That's really what you have to factor in. You're only able to get about 30 to 40% per season of different cuts. So collectively, if you look at your tree, you may find that you have multiple big limbs, multiple places need to be pruned. And yet when you think about your whole tree as 100%, you're really only able to factor in 30 to 40% every single season. We'll talk about some of the cuts that go into that percentage. Should you seal up the cuts? You see this a lot when you go to a home hardware store where the aisle of pruning equipment, you will see this pruning seal. You're not going to be using this pruning seal. If you prune things correctly, in fact, the cuts that are made on your tree will heal up properly and seal up properly. We also don't recommend this spray because it can trap in moisture and it can actually kill your fruit trees over time. Occasionally, you also see in some of the home fruit production guides, dormant oil. And dormant oil is a bit of a misnomer because in fact, it would be applied a little bit outside the dormancy window. So you wouldn't be pruning and applying dormant oil at the same time. You need to wait until the temperatures get to 30 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit in order to apply this oil. And it is one that addresses smaller insects, aphids, scales, some of those smaller insects that maybe you want to address that season. If you find that you just don't have enough time to do a lot of pruning, aim for maybe the minimum, which is those water sprouts, very small suckers, those that tend to be about pencil width in size, and kind of go from there. We'll get more into this a little bit as we go along today, though. If you find that you've got a very big, very vigorous growing tree and you're thinking to yourself, well, what if I top this tree? Where you're kind of coming through, as you see here in this photo, and it's just a clear cut. We don't recommend this action. The reason for that is that it's actually not going to help you out. It's actually going to create much more aggressive growth than what you were fully wanting. And it doesn't solve your problem. The other issue you encounter with this topping action is you'll find that fruit of your fruit trees will tend to be more concentrated higher up. So it's already concentrated higher up. You come in, you top the tree, and it still continues to be concentrated and higher up in that tree. So it's really not addressing much of a problem here. The other problem you encounter here with this topping action is you have now created so many open wounds from these cuts that you may not have been able to seal and heal them up properly during this dormancy period. And so what you may find is that these wounds are still open and it allows for disease to move in and potentially kill that tree. So we don't recommend this. It's just very hard for that tree to really bounce back, and you open the tree up and make it very vulnerable. If your tree has been topped, we've had some folks that have done that, or maybe the electrical company came in and topped an aggressive growing fruit tree. What you want to try to do, if you can, is to decide on a direction for each of those limbs. So you see kind of in this drawing here, the growth after topping, where about every cut, there's 2 and 3 limbs coming from it. Ideally, what you want to try to do is remove all except for one of them, which could then take over that limb. You might also find that you have to kind of do a battle. So you have to really focus on pruning at eye level while knowing full well that higher up in the tree is really where the growth is wants to focus. So you're continually kind of battling back and forth there. What about summer pruning? No, please don't do any summer pruning. The reason for this is that anything like pruning in the summer, it's incompatible to these fruit trees. They're focusing on, creating that fruit in the summertime, and then they're going to begin the process of slowing down and begin to enter into that dormancy period into late fall and into winter. So it's very incompatible to what these trees are doing. If you get a hankering, if you get some urge that you just got to prune something, maybe a little bit of small limb here and there, but none of your main pruning is going to be in the summertime for fruit trees. And we definitely do not recommend anything as far as late summer or fall. Just hide the pruners during this period of time to avoid doing any additional pruning here. It's just very hard for the tree to heal and seal up those wounds that have been created in the pruning process to then enter the dormancy period without sustaining any winter damage. So when we think about maybe pruning those smaller ones, like a dwarf or semi-dwarf tree, you're going to find that it's a very similar approach. We still are thinking about 30 to 40%. We still are thinking about some of the main limbs that maybe get in the way of those trees. It's just very similar. But what you'll find is that you just don't have to prune a lot. And that sometimes is the benefit with these dwarf and semi-dwarf trees, is that when it comes to pruning them, you don't have to prune a lot sometimes, or you may find that that it's very easier to prune these trees too. You could also address a lot of problems based on that it's the height of these trees and their age. You can also sometimes get away with providing weight, stretching kind of those vertical limbs and getting them into a lot of good shape, which we're not really talking about today too much, but know that that would be another advantage to the whole pruning thing. And be very cautious of just cutting too much from the tree in a given year. You might look at your dwarf or semi-dwarf tree and think to yourself, you've got maybe 3 big limbs that need to come out. And yet you're going to find that you need to stagger them, because if you took out all of those limbs at that time, that might be 50% of that entire tree for that season. So you just can't do that. What are some other problems that arise when we start talking about fruit tree pruning? This is kind of what I tried to do, is that, this happens a lot. Some of these questions show up, especially where we're located in Northern Illinois. We encounter seasons where there's just no yields. One of the things to mention, especially on a backyard setting, is for apples and pears, you need more than one variety. And you may encounter that you have a new orchard that you just put in the backyard, and you have 6 apple trees, and every single one of them is the same variety. And you should expect to not have any yields, because you always need more than one variety blooming at the same time for cross-pollination. We also encounter, for apples and pears, a very late spring frost into end of April, into early May, that can do some severe bud damage on these fruits. And it may mean that you just don't have fruits that season, or it may mean that you don't have as much as you were expecting. For peaches and plums, we have very cold winters where we're just not going to see any fruit. It's going to damage those buds. And then typically the cutoff for this is about -8 Fahrenheit. So if we have consecutive days of negative Fahrenheit air temperatures, it's very liable that those tree buds on peaches, plums, and other stone fruit are just not going to survive. At the same time, if they have survived the cold winter, they're going to get potentially hit hard with a late spring frost. So that's the issue with growing them, though we still say try it out, see what happens. One of the other things you might encounter is this biennial fruiting, where no yield last year, but then you've had a good year before. It certainly could be weather related, but you might also find it's a biennial fruiting issue, where you're just getting a lot of fruit load one year, and then you're not getting enough the next year. Ideally, what's happening here is that you just need to prune more. You may find that the tree just has too much fruit. You might also do some thinning, which I'll send you resources on some thinning actions and explain that a little bit more in my email, but that could be something that you may have to do here too. If you find you have excessive fruit drop, say that the tree produced fruits, you can see the fruits, but all of a sudden they just drop off the tree. It could be that they just had too much fruit. And yet again, try to pruning, and pruning should hopefully alleviate some of them. As you can see with this list, some of these things are certainly in your control, such as pruning that maybe could help address that tree, but there's stuff that's out of your control. We just hope for a mild winter. We hope for a spring frost, but it's not too late when the growth of these is occurring. So some pruning goals then. As you think about your trees in your backyard or in your growing area, we want to get scaffold branches closer to harvest level. That's going to be one of the main goals, especially for a standard fruit tree that maybe is 25, 30 feet tall. I know the fruit is much higher up, and yet we're trying to get it closer to eye level that we can harvest from. That's going to be one of our goals when it comes to some of these trees. We also want to consider pruning out wood that just interferes with the tree's productivity. It's on the tree limbs, but it's not serving any purpose. And you need to consider removing those limbs because they're not doing you much good. The longer they stay on, they're going to increase in their weight. They could just severely affect that tree. At the same time, think about a shape and a height that really works for you. As much as we can say that your scaffold branches need to be in this shape, in this direction, and you need to, think about, what it looks like, you may find that you need to also step back and think about how your orchard is set up. I know with my family orchard, we have to get a lawnmower through this orchard to mow. And so we're very aware of where some of those branches are so that they're not interfering when it comes to the mowing that we have to do. We also want to consider keeping disease from spreading, especially in the Midwest. We see a lot of really bad destructive diseases that affect our apples, our pears, our cherry, our peaches, and so many. So we really want to be thinking of that. And then think about long-term focus. I think that that's something that once you start this process of pruning and really begin thinking about what shape you want that tree to look like, you're going to find that you have to think a bit more long-term. You have to identify that, okay, this limb comes out in 2021, maybe this limb comes out in 2022, but then maybe between these 2 years in that summer season, things have changed. So now you have to replan what you were thinking that you were going to prune out. But still think long-term. Still think that this is a 3-4 year process that begins this season to getting that tree into a really good shape for you. The way that I tend to approach pruning for fruit trees is twofold. I think of it as the high productivity. So maybe I have a tree that is a dwarf, a semi-dwarf, and maybe it's 5 to 10 years old. And I think to myself, okay, in 3 years' time, I'm going to try to get 30 to 40% percentages of cuts every year from that tree. And that 30 to 40% might include a very big limb, might include some water sprouts, might include some smaller limbs. It's not going to involve any topping whatsoever. And it might involve some other branches that are just not in the right shape that it needs to be. But ideally, I'm going to try to get 30 to 40% every year in the course of 3 years. I then think of other trees. It might be a toleration tree. So it could be that the tree is 25, 30 feet tall. I certainly am not going to be able to climb this tree up and prune high up into that tree. So I think of this more of just giving it some attention, removing some of those water sprouts and suckers and other things, removing any large limbs that are dead or really interfere with the equipment. But just giving some of those older trees some attention, knowing full well that it's not going to be as highly productive, but I'm still going to be able to, I hopefully get some fruit in really good years. It's important to recognize that you can have both of these. You could have trees in your backyard that are high productivity, that's really where a lot of the pruning is every single season. And then you have toleration trees. You look at the taller tree, you're giving it some pruning, you're removing some limbs, but you're not out there doing a lot based on its height, its age, and maybe some other factors that you encounter. And thinking about your arsenal, if you will, or kind of what you might want to have as far as pruning needs, these is kind of assembled here is what I use. So certainly loppers, the ones you see in the top left corner, having some loppers here is going to help for some of those, getting into kind of sometimes the nooks and crannies, if you will, of some of the tree limbs that you might need to remove. I would encourage you to also have some extendable loppers, and that's what you see here in this photo, or is loppers that extend and allows me to get much higher up in the tree. But these are going to be able to kind of bridge that middle ground. So they're going to be able to remove some of the limbs that certainly hand pruners in this photo can't get to, but it's not going to be able to get those big limbs out that either of those saws that you see in this photo would be utilized for. Both of the saws here, I think, work really well from a standpoint of getting some of those limbs that are much bigger, but also maybe are just malformed and they're hard to get to. Certainly this kind of hand saw on the left here you see underneath the loppers is one that I really like quite a bit and gives me some really good control. And then I compare that to the red saw on the right that you see here, which I find works really well for some of those much bigger limbs here too. You note a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, but as you're thinking about making cuts on a tree, consider trying to kind of wash down some of your tools with a rubbing alcohol solution to keep disease from spreading. It's very important to do this for some of your pear trees, especially Bartlett pear, as these tend to have some really bad diseases that can easily be spread when you're pruning your orchard. You may find that a chainsaw is needed for some of those bigger limbs. That could be an option for you too. I think as you look at your trees and depending on how many you have and how big the trees are, you may find that you just need the chainsaw for 1 or 2 cuts, not that many. There's also a number of these newer kind of small electric gas pruners on the market. I know Stihl makes one, Milwaukee also makes one. They basically look like tiny chainsaws, and yet they call them these pruners. I've played around with, I've thought about buying one. The issue is they're very expensive. So that's the only, my hesitation there, but it looks like a tiny chainsaw. It's very strange. And apparently they're very popular because many places are sold out actually. So as far as the pest management goes, I come from a place of being concerned about insects and diseases on fruits and vegetables. That's primarily what I do a lot of my work in. And when you think about pruning, this is a good time to just do some good practices that we hope are going to keep disease from spreading. So certainly during your pruning, cut correctly during the dormancy. If it's a big limb, you're just going right before, the cut will be made right before you see this kind of branched collar. So you see that little bit of a bump where my blue arrow is. You're going right before that and cutting down. And hopefully during that cut, we'll seal up properly during this dormancy period. You also want to mention, clean tools between cuts, especially on a single tree before moving to another. So, as you look at one tree, spend your time there with your pruners, trying to clean them, especially before moving to other tree rather. This is also a good time to think about removing any debris that could overwinter or has overwintered. So any of the leaf material, any of those gross fruits that have dropped on the ground, this is the time to remove them because in many cases, a wet spring is going to hit that debris and it will move right up into the tree. So these are leaves. This is fruit from the previous season. Rake it away, destroy it, keep it away from these trees because that's where the disease and other issues can move in. We've mentioned before dormant spray. This is after pruning when you could do this. When it comes to a big cut, if you have a very big limb, it has, as we know, a lot of weight to it. And so you want to be mindful of removing it because you don't want to remove it in such a fashion that it actually splits from that tree. And now you've got a bigger problem than you were originally expecting. And so what you see here with this drawing is you actually want to do a couple of very small cuts on that big limb. And so you see here, you've got kind of a first cut that goes out. Underneath that branch, you have a second cut on the top, and then your final cut is closer to that branch collar, right at the base, right where that branch collar fits. And the idea here is it's just distributing that weight, especially if it's a big cut that you might need to be doing. You could, of course, if you found that a big limb needs to come out, you could gradually prune back towards the main trunk of your tree. That's another strategy you could do as well. But certainly just be very mindful as you get closer to that trunk because it's very hard for that tree to really recover once it's got a big wound in its main trunk. What about where you're going to make these cuts? So especially if you think about a branch, perhaps, you're going to look for a couple of features on say, as you see here with apples and pears. So in this photo here, on the left, this is the leaf bud of your apple and pear tree. On the right is your fruit bud, your spurs. And so you will see on a scaffold branch, say a very horizontal branch, like a Christmas tree shape that goes out against the central, the trunk of the tree, you will see these little spurs. And the spurs here in this photo is what's going to develop your fruit. You will see them all over the place sometimes, but certainly you're going to see them a lot on any branch that is very horizontal on your tree. So when you think that you have a branch that you want to keep, you're working your way back on that branch just to where that bud, where that spur is. And that's what you see in this drawing that I did for you. The top photo shows that you're coming out just about 1/2 inch if I was deciding to prune this branch. And notice the direction that I'm making with that slash. So having that directional slash actually can heal and seal up that cut much easier than if it was straight up and down. One of the other questions that we'll talk about some tonight too is, if you think, okay, I've got this branch, I like how it looks, but where would I make the cut? Ideally also too, you might make it just before it goes in an opposite direction. So as we think about a branch that we want to stay as horizontal as possible, I'm pruning it back to where it just begins to grow vertical, especially if I don't like that any of the directions the branch would be currently growing. If I did like a direction, I could certainly remove 2 and leave 1. But as you kind of see in this photo, all 3 directions on this branch at the bottom are just the ones I'm not really happy with, because I want this branch to stay as horizontal as it can be. So central leader's tree structure, we're thinking about a Christmas tree shape. So you would think about it has one leader branch in the middle here in the green, and then you're going to have scaffold branches that are in blue off the tree. You've heard me talk a lot about scaffold branches tonight already, and those branches will have your fruit on them if you have it in this central leader structure. So all of the spurs that you saw in the previous photo would be covering these blue branches. You also have suckers in the yellow, so they're coming from the base of the tree. They're not serving you much purpose. You also have water sprouts that are kind of, very much just covering the tree some years. And these are growing potentially vertical on the scaffold branch. Sometimes they're growing into the tree. Sometimes they're growing downward. They're not serving much purpose here. They're not doing me much good being on this tree. Sometimes we have secondary scaffolds. So it could be that I had, say, a water sprout that I forgot to prune the previous year, and now has doubled and tripled in its width. And so now it's a pretty dominant feature of that scaffold branch. And at that point, it might actually be producing fruit, but because it's growing vertically on the scaffold branch, it's not doing me much purpose here, serving me much good. You also find that every place that your scaffold branch connects with a central leader, you actually want it to be about 45 to 60 degrees. And sometimes that percentage actually can help you determine whether you're going to leave a scaffold behind or whether you're going to keep that scaffold branch behind too. When we think about maybe having a big cut on our tree, sometimes it is the scaffold branch. Sometimes it's such a very dominant scaffold branch that's taking over that tree that that's the branch that needs to come out when we think about pruning it. So what you'll see tonight is these colors. You'll see the greens, the blues, the reds, and so forth on photos tonight. But what I really want you to start thinking about is when you think about your trees, try to find the leader. Every tree tends to have a leader. I will tell you that a lot of the fruit trees have multiple leaders. And depending on the age, which we'll talk about, sometimes that's very much an issue. But try to find a central leader. And then from there, start to prune out dead wood. Start to look for any kind of water sprouts, any branches that are growing vertically, downward, inward, any that are just not giving you that Christmas tree shape that you're really expecting. And then finally, think about maybe a cross. Maybe it's a branch that's crossing over another one. The other thing I might encourage you to do is look for replacements. Once you've kind of gone through this list, think about replacement branches. If it is a scaffold that you don't like, maybe it's too close to the tree, going up close to the tree, look below that scaffold branch and see if on that central leader, there's a baby scaffold. It's not the scientific term, but there might be a very small scaffold underneath there that over time could replace that scaffold that's right above it. Also consider finding your big cut. Look at that tree and see if there's one branch on there that could completely change how that tree is, that could potentially remove so much weight that that tree could potentially just be performing entirely different. I think that if you think about this list, you may find that you have a lot to go with it. And as said, you're not just pruning in 2021, you've got to start this process for the years to come. This is a drawing that one of our other extension services put together. You can kind of see kind of those principles, of like, okay, if we look at this tree and we have a bit of a central leader, we're coming through and we're removing things such as any diseased branches, any kind of dead branches, anything that's kind of broken. You see kind of those crossing branches there too that could kind of easily come out, along with those kind of water shoots, very small, pencil width in their shape. And then certainly anything that's growing at the soil line that is not that central leader fruit tree would need to come out of it too. And you can imagine this can add up pretty quickly. You can certainly add up to that 30 to 40% pretty quickly here too. In most cases, I would probably not classify dead branches as that 30 to 40%, but certainly other branches and other growth that you see here could collectively get to that 30 to 40% pretty quickly. So what are you looking for? A couple of examples here. Certainly dead wood is very easy to spot. You'll find, especially as you kind of start putting your hands in it, that it will tend to kind of break off. It'll just kind of fall apart. And certainly any of that can be removed quite easily. It's not serving you any purpose at this point. It also is potentially going to harbor disease problems. You see in this other photo, some of the fruit tree here, it has it all. Sometimes it's a little hard to figure out where to start because you've got crosses, you've got vertical, you've got downward, you've got branches going inward into the tree. So it can certainly be a lot that needs to come out and can be kind of, where you think about getting started, certainly get back to that idea, okay, where is my central leader, and look towards scaffolds. Try to find that fruit is usually a good place to go. And then considering, is there a branch within this mess that could come out that really is affecting the rest of those branches? Suckers you see here, this is one of our fruit trees in Tennessee. It's a fruit tree, it's an apple tree, but you can certainly see a lot of it's just going to be right at the base of that tree that would be removed. It's not serving me any purpose. It's growing from the soil line. Just removing that would be a good place to start. You might also find competing leaders on some of your trees, which is what you see here, because of the age of the tree and certainly because of the leaders being pretty much the same width. This would be one that would certainly be a toleration tree. I'm not going to remove one of the central leaders because at this point, that central leader is almost 50% of that entire tree. It would be very hard and many, many years to come for that tree to kind of get into one shape. So you may find that you have trees that have competing leaders, and depending on their age, depending on the width of those trunks, it may be fine just to accept that that's the shape that tree is going to be. Some other issues that you might also encounter. It's very common, of course, to see bird damage. Perhaps you've had an infestation of woodpeckers or something, that have come in and done some damage. Sometimes burlap wrap around those areas can help with this and kind of keep them from getting to it. You might also have seasonal weather damage. We get calls all the time in our extension office of folks that have had summer storms that have moved in, especially as we saw this past year. And perhaps that summer storm has created damage on the fruit tree. Maybe it has collapsed, maybe it's lost a big limb and that's opened it up, a big wound with it. In most cases, you might consider supporting it if possible, as that has happened. And certainly that would change entirely how you prune that fruit tree. You can see here one of our fruit trees in Tennessee that has been propped up for about 10 to 15 years after it had sustained some damage. And certainly when we think of, gosh, where do you even start with a central leader in here? There's one in there somehow, But certainly the principles of pruning would be where you go, thinking about some of the limbs that interfere, some of those suckers, and some of those other ones. If you find that you had limb loss during the season, say for instance, you came out and a big scaffold had fallen down, and now you have this open wound, if you will, try to remediate. You may find that you have to prune it at that point, depending on if it has happened during the summer or in the spring. We still recommend do not applying any sealant, even though that wound is pretty substantial. Hope for recovery, but also recognize that probably you're not going to be doing much pruning this season, because it may have been just a big wound that had opened up based on this kind of limb loss. You may find that that really was all the collective pruning that you might have been doing for the year. So be a little bit patient with it, give it some time to see how it recovers, and hopefully it seals up, but also recognize that you may not be doing much pruning this season because of that. If you find during this process that you've had any deer, any wildlife damage, this may also lessen or make you even not prune for the season. This is a peach tree that I planted past spring. I came out, I think the first or second week of October, and a deer had caused the damage, which you see here. It is a dwarf peach tree, so as we think about how much is on this dwarf peach tree, they took a sizable amount against it, even with some deer deterrent in place, if you will. So I'm not planning to prune this tree because effectively the deer has already pruned it for me. Consider using deer guard. If you have any mulch around the base of the tree, we would recommend not having mulch around the base. That tends to be an area where mammals can sometimes move in, so we don't recommend that. You might also consider a soap deterrent, such as Irish Spring, which you could hang around the trunk of your fruit tree. And then you might also consider hot pepper spray to keep deer away from it. The only thing to mention here is that some of the hot pepper sprays on the market are not listed for fruit and vegetable production. While I don't expect you to be eating the limbs and the leaves of the fruit trees, I fully just have to recognize that some of them are not listed for that. So you want to make sure you have one for it. You can also imagine that any sort of rain, any weather will wash this off, this hot pepper spray. If you find that you have a deep cut into the leader, there's a couple of things to consider. You might find that you can move over to another leader and kind of start that process over again. You might also give some time to see if that leader could seal up properly. But you might also have to recognize that it's just going to be some kind of watching it for the next couple of seasons to come. And yet again, too, probably would not do as much pruning into this winter season, just to ensure that it sustains itself and it hopefully recovers for you. So one of the things that I developed the last couple of years was to take photos of the fruit trees that my family was growing and we were trying to figure out how to prune. And I take them and kind of take a 2D image of them and I color them. And you've seen this already tonight in some of the emails that you have sent to me. And the reason that I like to do this is that it gives me a game plan. It helps us to figure out that, okay, this is the tree that we're dealing with. And as we look at this tree, where is that central leader? Where do we feel like the scaffold branches are? And where might the vertical limbs be? Or some of the limbs that we want to remove? I've done this for many years using the Microsoft Paint program, which you can do. I've since switched over to using an iPad for this. So you can actually kind of utilize some of the iPad features and your iPhone features to color it in. The other thing to recognize, of course, is that this is just 2D. It's not giving me that full perspective around that tree. And yet it can at least kind of give us an idea of what the tree looks like, what we hope the tree could be, and where we need to get started when it comes to kind of pruning these trees. You know, as you look at this tree, we have to certainly recognize that just because it's colored doesn't mean it's coming out. What it's meaning is that, okay, here's where I think the central leader is based on this drawing. Here's where my scaffold or lateral branches are, which in the blue, which will be producing the fruit. And then finally, here are my vertical limbs, suckers, other ones that are just not doing me much good. They're not serving any purpose here when it comes to it. And they can give us a place to start. You know, we can look at this tree and kind of say, okay, here's where a big cut could be. Here is a place where the central leader branches off in two directions. So I need to decide on one direction, potentially for my central leader. Here are scaffolds in place, and yet maybe underneath those scaffolds in the blue are very tiny scaffolds that could potentially replace the scaffold that I don't like with it. So it can be a game plan. It can kind of help you, figure out these. And certainly those that would like their photos colored can send them still. I know a lot of you have sent me some, which I've tried to do tonight. So we're going to keep seeing these colors as we go along. So on this tree, this is yet again one of our family orchard trees. You kind of see we've got a little bit of a central leader in place. Potentially we have two central leaders that have kind of split at this point, both growing vertically. And it's possible I could come in there and I could kind of maybe reshape it back to one of those central leaders. But I have to recognize full well that based on potentially the width of that tree, it may just be what I have. You also note in this tree, especially the scaffold on the left there, that's very low on the tree, is too low, but it's also growing pretty much vertically. So that would be a limb that could come out quite easily. You also see in the red, we've got smaller branches that are growing vertically, not serving me much purpose at this point. But certainly depending on kind of what the age of the tree is, what our end goals are, this could be maybe a bit more of a toleration tree and just kind of cleaning it up, removing some of those limbs like that kind of vertical scaffold and any branches that are growing downward that could easily come out from that tree. You saw this tree originally, and so, yes, there is a central leader in there. It takes a little bit more to kind of consider here. And you can see that everything in red would easily come out. Everything is vertical. They're not serving much purpose. And removing them first, removing all those kind of red branches here, I then would be able to think what my next moves might be. And honestly, I think a lot of the move that I would do would be removing that scaffold in the blue on the right, because you can see that it's just way too low to that soil line. We're talking about probably about 1.5 feet from where that soil line is. And we've really needed almost 6-8 inches higher up to where it matches that first scaffold on the left there. So you kind of want to think about, okay, that kind of evening out of the tree. This is certainly a tree too that would be toleration again. It's certainly one that I'm not fully expecting it to get into that kind of envisioning that great central leader design, but hopefully by removing some of the growth that is unwarranted and maybe taking out that scaffold on the right there and bringing some balance back to that tree, perhaps then the tree would begin to get to a better shape. This is also a tree here too, where if I remove the scaffold on the right, I might look for a scaffold replacement from potentially one of the red branches just higher up, and that could even out this tree with it too. More photos to come, but just kind of as a little break here. Once you've figured out maybe what your cuts are going to be, as far as say your big cut, you're removing some of those suckers, those water sprouts, positioning some of your scaffolds in better shape and cutting them back, you might look towards upper limbs. So it could be that, okay, you're going to come in and you're going to take out maybe those upper limbs that are crossing, that are growing downward, that are growing vertical. So it may not be that they're, say, very small limb, but they could be ones that are just interfering, you could change that out. You might also look for competing leaders and competing scaffolds. That's another area that I'll show some photos of tonight, where you see on a single tree, you might have 2 or 3 competing leaders. And one of the greatest actions you might be able to do is to remove 1 or 2 of those. The same with scaffolds, knowing full well that this is where your fruit is, and yet the scaffolds maybe are too high up for you. Look for replacement limbs for scaffolds. Consider kind of those narrow crotch angles that are just too close to the tree, so it's growing up against it. And then one of the things we always consider is, assess the cuts into summer and into next winter. Any attention this tree is going to get is going to provide just a good amount of relief. Your tree is going to respond very positively. Now, the response sometimes is the creation of a lot of suckers and a lot of water sprouts covering that tree. In this drawing here that I've done for you, as we think about a scaffold branch that really we want to keep, you may look at that single scaffold branch and realize that there's a lot of places to really prune from. And that's what you notice here in the red. All the red would come out, And then my next step on that single scaffold I want to keep would be this kind of secondary scaffold that's growing vertically on the tree. It's not serving me much purpose, and it's putting, over time, is going to put considerable weight on that scaffold branch. And then as I think about following that scaffold branch all the way out from the trunk and the central leader, I might then decide that, okay, it's staying as vertical as it can, and yet this one place, it just starts to grow, just starts to grow vertically. So I want it to stay as horizontal as much as I can here. So you may find that once you have kind of assessed your trees and you like your scaffolds, it's going down that scaffold and removing limbs off of it that are just not serving you much purpose. This is one of our other trees, so yet again, very much a toleration tree. I've got two competing leaders in this situation. If I was to remove one of these central leaders, we're talking about 50% of that tree that would be coming out. So we're really not going to recommend that. The thing that I might consider doing is to try to see if I could get scaffolds closer to harvest level for me. You see both, I've got two blue scaffolds on either side that are in fairly good shape at this point for a toleration tree, but perhaps I could actually find some additional, smaller scaffolds underneath them that could provide replacements so that the fruit is getting closer to me. So that's going to be that continual fight, is that, okay, you have a standard tree that's 25, 30 feet tall. We certainly don't recommend and expect you to get high up on the tree to prune. Yet, what can you do at eye level? Could you find replacement scaffolds? Could you be able to, find these smaller limbs that over the course of years and 2 or 3 years could replace those scaffolds and get fruit closer to you? So it's very much a constant battle. And when you are doing this pruning action and giving attention to the tree at certain places, you're going to find the response of that tree might be the development of new limbs that could work for you. So very similar, look for the replacements, look after fruit fall. This is especially important for a lot of your trees, is that if they have dropped any kind of in June, July, kind of start to envision what those limbs could look like into, say, next year's pruning process. This is something I'm kind of always thinking about as I prune. It's like, okay, I'm going to prune in 2021. I'm going to see how the tree responds in the summer. And then, we see how that changes in the wintertime. Perhaps it changes dramatically, perhaps it really doesn't. But really start to see the effect of weight loss. I think especially for any trees that have been neglected for 5 or 6 years or more, you're going to find that this weight loss, this pruning, can be very transformative. And then, of course, think about year 2 of renovation. What are some limbs that need to stay in place? What are some limbs that can be replaced? Consider kind of what that shape could look like. This is a great example here. So you originally saw this tree on one of the first couple of slides in today's presentation. And over time, we have removed some of these big limbs, which are really dominant, these scaffold branches, which you see here. So one of the scaffolds was removed, and you see here that the response of that pruning was the development of these water sprouts, which you see here. Now, most of these water sprouts is really not what we want. We would prune out most of them. And yet you can actually see that there are some that developed from this that we actually might keep in. You can see that one that's really close, that's pretty almost a clear replacement to that scaffold there on the left there. You also note that one developed much further below on the tree trunk, which we don't want. It's too low on the ground. And yet you may find that the removal of one big limb or one big cut that needs to come out will see a response for replacement branches without you realizing it. Now, of course, a lot of them I don't want, but potentially I've got one in here that might be a good replacement branch. This is also a tree that went through a pruning in the previous year. And so a lot of things will come out of the tree, and this is I believe this is a semi-dwarf tree, so it's getting about 16 feet or so at maturity. So you'll note that at this point, it looks like I've got a good central leader growing straight up, and yet I probably have a central leader on the right side here that's pretty dominant. Because we're still thinking about a dwarf tree, if I am focused on removing that central leader on the right that I don't want, I'm probably not going to take it out in one full year. I'm probably going to kind of cut back over time. The reason being is that's a pretty big percentage. If I was to take out that competing leader on the right there, it's a very large percentage of that entire tree. The other thing you see in this image here too is that I have the ability on the left there in that black circle to find replacement scaffolds. So I could prune out many of them and actually find a scaffold in there that I want to keep. Because this is a dwarf tree, it's not too tall. I'm able to kind of prune it and play around with it at this point with it too. But certainly you can see on the right, there's an opportunity to remove that competing leader over time. On the left, I have scaffold branch replacements here too. You may encounter as you look at your fruit trees that this is already in place. You already have replacement scaffolds. You just have to choose which one you want from there with it. As you go higher up in the tree, what you do notice is that there are blue scaffolds that are growing vertically. And you may find you just need to cut them back to where they remain horizontal. This is obviously not going to be a tree that gets into that perfect Christmas tree shape, but it is one where we can use those similar practices of trying to get scaffold branches as horizontal as possible, and also trying to get kind of a central leader shape in check. The response of the trees, especially that second year, is just going to be pretty much a lot of what you see here. A lot of these very small branches are going to develop off of the tree, many of which we don't want. As you still look at this photo, we still think about that central leader structure. And we may find that the central leader is branching off and we need to prune it back to that main trunk. But your main cuts are still going to be water sprouts. You're still going to do dead wood. You're still potentially going to do 1 to 2 limb removals. And maybe it's a big cut here or there, depending on that tree and its age. So to show a couple of participants' photos, I wanted to include them tonight. And of course, you'll get these back in the next couple of days. This is one that Alicia sent in on behalf of Donna and Karen. And so you can see with this apple tree that, it's got that defined central leader in the green there, which you see on the right. And then I think what you notice though is that there's a lot of scaffold branches. And really when you think about this tree, you're wanting to kind of clean up these scaffold branches and trying to ensure that they're growing as horizontal as they can. And that's really what you notice on the right and the left is that there's competing scaffold branches at this point. And there's a very dominant scaffold branch on the left. That's one that you kind of see there that, right beside that central leader, it just grows straight up. And if we were thinking of maybe a big cut for this tree, that would probably be the one to focus on, is that scaffold branch, because it's so dominant in that tree. And it's important to realize that your central leader branch always needs to be the tallest branch on this tree, and you don't want a scaffold branch to take over. It's possible, of course, that this could have been a central leader, but I really think that that left scaffold branch is so dominant on the tree that partial removal of it, or at least kind of removing it and cutting it back, would allow this tree and that central leader to get in a really good shape with it as well. I kind of put on either side, the left and the right, you kind of see these little white markings. And these are areas where you could clean up, focusing in on where you have scaffolds that are crossing, that are growing inward, that are growing vertical. All of those could be kind of cleaned up so that they're just not competing against one another. Would be a great location and a great focus to do on them. This is one of Richard's trees. And so you see a very clear central leader style. You see that really in that center there, he's got a great central leader. It looks really good. As you get higher up in the tree, it does look like it maybe splits a little bit in 2 different directions. So you could certainly kind of, I think this is a pretty tall tree, Richard, of course. So you may find you're not able to get up there. But I think one of the great benefits you see here is that the scaffolds on both the right and the left are in really good positions. The only issue is that there's a lot of competition with those scaffolds, especially on the right. You really see a lot of competition there, just where a lot of the scaffolds are growing up against one another and going in. For reference, a scaffold, there needs to be about 8 to 10 inches between each scaffold. So as you can see on the right there, there's a lot of those scaffolds that are maybe 2 to 3 inches between each. These scaffolds also do not need to block out each other. So you don't want them to actually keep the sunlight from getting to them. So any that are running parallel, you may find that you actually need to remove one of those scaffolds. On the left side, I put a white star because this potentially might be a big cut. And you can kind of see, especially when you look at the first photo and then compare it to the second photo, that's a pretty dominant scaffold at this point. And it probably is putting some pressure on the rest of your scaffolds on that side. The issue though is that, I don't necessarily know if you could prune that entire thing out, nor would you maybe want to either. You could maybe start to kind of prune it back some, and that would be a really good step to kind of really help this tree, especially as you can see that just cleaning up that left side could really allow for those other scaffolds to kind of breathe, if you will, and kind of get into that good shape. Overall, you've got opportunities here on both the right and the left to kind of create some scaffold spacing and allow for these trees to be in good shape here too. This is one of Kyle's trees. So Kyle's tree you see here, yet again, a good central leader shape. I've got a good green coloration here. Higher up in the tree, you notice it does kind of split in a couple of different directions. So you could remove 2 of them and maybe decide on the direction that you want on that central leader trunk. You notice there's a lot of kind of red area where very small branches, they're just growing vertically, they're growing into the tree. Those could certainly come out with the tree. And then both sides is very much cleaning up the scaffolds. So those blue scaffolds that are crossing, that are growing into one another, that maybe are kind of a bit more dominant there too, that can be removed as well. And you kind of notice that, I think, especially on the right side, that bottom scaffold branch, where if you potentially pruned it back and removed some of that weight kind of in the middle of the scaffold, that can maybe open it up and provide some more support with it too. But overall, like both sides, you've got options, you've got great scaffolds in place. You just kind of remove some of those competing scaffolds to really help the tree. You notice, especially in this photo of Kyle's, that there's a lot of fruit higher up in the tree. And of course, there's a lot of fruit in the middle of the tree. So we certainly hope that maybe removing some of the scaffolds and opening it up for more sunlight could really help some of that fruit develop closer to harvest and eye level. One of our final trees tonight is Craig's. And so Craig's, you can see, is a dwarf or a dwarf tree at this point. You kind of note there's a lot of places where you just got vertical limbs growing in the red here. Higher up in the tree on that central leader branch, there's an area where you've got multiple directions. So you could come in and maybe prune and figure out just one direction that you want the tree to grow in. Further down in kind of that first level of a scaffold, there's red branches here that could also be pruned. If you follow your tree, your scaffolds kind of towards the end, you do start to note that there's kind of 3 or 4 different directions you're going. And so what you could do is remove maybe 3 of them and leave behind 1 if you felt that that was kind of the scaffold that you were after. But you certainly can also see too on the right where there's maybe secondary scaffolds growing vertically on the scaffold that you want to keep. I've highlighted 2 areas in circles, and the reason for this is that this is probably areas where you want to see if there are scaffold replacements. Ideally, you're trying to maybe balance the tree's weight out, and I'm concerned that you need another scaffold where both of those white circles are, just to kind of balance the tree out a little bit more here. Overall, when you think of 30 to 40%, it's gonna be a lot of the rad, and then from there, maybe cleaning up competing leaders higher up in the tree, and then clean up some of the scaffolds on either side. But certainly once you start removing a lot of the red branches, that will really help you to figure out what your next steps are. So thanks to those that sent photos. I know a lot of you also sent photos in. I wasn't able to put everyone's photos in tonight, but you will get them back in the next couple of days, and you also get a little bit of an email kind of sharing what I think you might want to do. That's a service I provide, more than happy to do. The Espalier design, this is something where you might be interested in doing it if you have planted dwarf, semi-dwarf trees the last couple of years. These are ones that are on a trellis system, basically. And so it's growing against a wall. It can take some time, maybe 5 to 6 years. And we tend to see better success with very young trees or semi-dwarf trees. Very similar approach as far as the pruning needs of the Espalier design, but it could require also light pruning throughout the year. So this would be one that may find that you need to do some additional pruning into the growing season, even though we usually don't recommend that for a traditionally grown tree. I put together kind of a quick little drawing just to show you, if I'm just planting this and I'm wanting to do an Espalier design, a lot of it is that I'm coming in and I'm kind of creating a cut here at about 2 feet on a dwarf or semi-dwarf tree. And then from there, I'm basically moving these scaffolds down to where they're going to be trellised for their entire life. And then when it comes to, say, the actual pruning that I might be doing, it will be removing a lot of the red limbs, which you see in this photo, and potentially some of those other scaffolds that might be getting in the way. But your scaffolds are remaining in place their entire life. I've looped them, as you see here in this drawing with the gray. You're tying them down to a trellising support system. You could maybe do this without the trellising system, but you've got to certainly imagine it's going to be a little bit more complicated as the seasons goes along. If you've pruned or grown grapes before, it takes a similar method in some capacity when it comes to growing grapes in some ways. So our last group is stone fruit. So this is going to be your fruit bowl shape. You have this single trunk. It's about 18 to 30 inches. And then off of that single trunk, you're going to have about 2 to 5 scaffold branches. And they're growing close together, and they're growing vertically. That's the different shape that these have. The reason that stone fruit performs really well on them is just allows for good airflow, and it allows for better pollination in that capacity. Some of our stone fruit do not require an additional variety. They don't require additional cross-pollinator. And so the pollination within this shape really allows for good airflow. No branches are facing southwest. You've got crotch angles that are about 40 to 90 degrees off of the center here with it. In this drawing of this open center pruning, so if you said start at first year spring, you would be pruning a heading cut, which you note here in that red mark. And from there, you're developing your scaffolds into second year spring, into third year spring, with every kind of red mark you see here would be the limbs that would be coming out of it. The only thing to be a little cautious of is that when it comes to our stone fruit in Northern Illinois, we pride ourselves on the years that we can grow it, and it's not every year that we get stone fruit. When you consider growing stone fruit in Northern Illinois, you may find that in years that we have warmer winters, if you will, might be the years that you do most of your pruning. You do more aggressive pruning in warmer winters. The reason for that is just because of the buds that are trying to survive into the winter and the spring, and I want you to have stone fruit. And if we certainly look at our weather and we realize it's fairly warm in the winter, that might be the year we decide to do pruning. So this year might be the year that we decide to do a lot of aggressive pruning on some of our peach trees that we have at our Rockford office. The photo you see here is the peach bud. So as you look at your stone fruit, you will find in that black circle the peach bud there. Higher up on this photo, in this limb, you actually see the leaf bud. So the leaf bud is higher up, the peach bud is actually in that circle. And you want to think about that as you're pruning the stone fruit. Yet again, maybe this year is when you do a lot of your pruning, aggressive pruning, and you don't do as much for other years, because I want you to have stone fruit. So here's one of my peach trees that was planted this past spring. It is a dwarf tree. You can see that I have the central leader structure. I've got my scaffolds in place, and yet it still is very young. So as you think about if you've planted stone fruit this past spring, you may not be as aggressive with a very, very young tree. You may want to give it a couple of years for it to really develop more of its branches so you can begin to get into the shape that you're really after. I certainly already see places where I could do some pruning. And you note here in my drawing on the right that I could take out one of the scaffold branches in year one. Maybe in year two, I would take out the other scaffold branch just because they're too low on this tree. And I'm maybe trying to get more of that open center, open face shape. I'm still deciding whether I'm going to do this. I'm still thinking more critically that I maybe need a little bit more of another year of growth, knowing full well that we've not even had a full year of it just yet. But certainly that might be something where you could get them in shape into that open bowl, fruit bowl shape, if it's a very young tree. This was the one that was pruned by the deer. You can already see they did a good job pruning. Was not wanting them to do it, and yet you can already see I've got my central leader and I have really 3 dominant scaffold branches higher up on this very, very young dwarf peach tree. So certainly because the deer have pruned it, I'm not going to be doing any pruning this year on this tree. We're just going to hope that the deer don't prune it again this upcoming fall. We have 2 peach trees at the Rockford office, and this is one of them that you see here. We have, these are about 10 years old. We kind of had someone that was looking after the trees for a while, and then they were never really pruned properly. So what I've tried to do the last couple of years is begin this process of pruning them. And what you really see is that it's central leader style. We've got 4 dominant central leaders that are coming from the base of the tree. Off of that tree, we've got my scaffold branches, but we also have branches that will need to be pruned out. It's possible that I could take out one of these central leaders and begin the process of maybe getting it into a shape that works well for it. But I'm still debating whether I want to do that or not, because there's just so much that needs to be pruned out of this tree that really wasn't pruned as well as it should have been. You also note that there's a very low scaffold on the left, and that's too low on that tree. It will be pruned out, and I think it's already been pruned out. This tree has produced well for us. It is a standard tree, so that does bring more uniqueness, of course, as peaches are much higher up in that tree. And yet we're trying to really focus on these scaffold branches closer to harvest level for us. So we're beginning to get wrapped up tonight. So feel free to go ahead and put some questions in the chat box. I do have a whiteboard with me so I can do some drawings if need be. Just want to mention a couple of resources. Whenever I teach this class, we have a lot of folks say, hey, I've got this fruit tree or this fruit. It produces really great for me, but I have no idea what it is. Could you help me? Sometimes I can. I would still encourage you to maybe look through some other resources. Orangepippin.com tends to be a pretty good place to start. If you have an idea of what the family history is of an apple variety, there's also Midwest Fruit Explorers group, which is a group that you could join and get some assistance there. Apples of North America is also a pretty good resource of a book. On our YouTube channel, University of Illinois Local Foods, there is a pruning old apple trees. And this looks very similar to tonight's presentation, albeit just a little bit older. We also have a backyard orchard program from this past spring, which is a kind of everything you need to think about and know when it comes to having a backyard orchard setting. And you will find a link for that at the same channel that tonight's recording will be placed. And I'll let you know where those are at. There's a couple of pruning guides I like. There's a Michigan State one, there's an Oregon one. From 1998 and a 2011 update. There's also some Espalier pruning from University of Florida. I think the drawback I have with a lot of the pruning guides is that they're mostly drawings and there's not good color photos. So be cautious of them because I think a lot of us, especially myself, I get more benefit out of having good color photos. If you're dealing with insects, the Great Lakes IPM, Integrated Pest Management, is a company that you can order traps from to potentially help with some of those insect problems that you might encounter. Certainly, it's one thing to prune your trees correctly and get them in good shape, and then insects and disease become a problem. I certainly understand. So that would be a good place to order any traps that you might need. So as we get wrapped up tonight, really think about that shape. You know, if you've got the tree and it has the potential to get into that central leader, Christmas tree style shape, go for it. But also recognize that maybe your tree can't get there. Or maybe your tree is going to take so many years that it's just not worth the hassle to go through this long-term process. So consider the shape, but also accept what the fruit tree looks like and what the fruit tree is always going to look like. Try to find that central leader. Every tree is going to have a central leader. Every tree is going to have multiple central leaders. It's very common. It happens to a lot of us who have planted fruit trees and letting the fruit trees gotten away from us. Aim to look for your scaffolds and look for those spurs on apples and pears, and look for your fruit buds on stone fruit. That's really going to help you figure out how to prune it, what to remove, what to leave behind. That's also going to encourage you to prune because you can actually see where the fruit we hope is going to develop for you this upcoming season. Once you've kind of figured out that leader and thought about your shape, find the big cut. Almost every tree that's not been pruned in many, many years has a big cut. Almost any tree that's not been pruned in many, many years has many, many big cuts. And yet, finding a big cut, you will find will just transform how you approach your pruning and also how that tree is responding to it. Expect the long-term process. Expect that this is a winter activity that you're always going to have to do for your fruit trees, especially as you begin this process of pruning. At the end of the day, make your cuts, but don't stress about the wrong cut. As long as you're doing some of the things I've shared with you tonight, as long as you are putting in good effort for it, it's still a fruit tree at the end of the day. You're still, we hope, going to get fruit from it. But don't worry if it's the wrong cut or if the tree doesn't respond to what you're expecting. So that's my email address, which you've gotten a couple of emails from me already, and you'll might get a couple more from me as well. That is my phone number, which is my direct line if you need to get in touch with me. That's also our YouTube channel, which you see there. You will get a link to tonight's presentation as well with tonight's recording too. So that will take you to that YouTube channel. So I'm going to start my video so you can see my face, and I am going to answer some questions. There was a question about looking at fertilizers for apple trees. Directions said not to fertilize in any year in which you have pruned more than 20%. Do you concur? I would agree with this. What you're going to find is that pruning action is going to will lead to a response of the tree, and that the tree will respond in producing a lot more vegetation. And that then means that you don't need to fertilize. I would also be a little hesitant kind of in doing any fertilizing, because you may find that, if the tree is staying really green, if it's producing really well for you, if you're finding good growth on that tree, you may find that you don't need to do much fertilizer with it actually. But certainly I would say if you've gotten into the habit and if you feel like you need to fertilize, certainly, limit your pruning that season, or, don't apply it that year. All right, any more questions? So question of what do you do with the central leader when your tree is very tall? You prune it. Typically for this, we don't recommend pruning it. If that leader has gotten very tall, just let it keep growing. And let it just branch off with the scaffolds and just let it get its height. The only thing that you might do though is that, if you found that your central leader was in a state that you didn't like, perhaps the central leader had a big wound in it, perhaps the central leader was going in, more of an opposite direction that you weren't liking with it, you might prune it back some and see if you could push it in another way. But a lot of cases when it comes to a too tall of a central leader, we wouldn't recommend going in and chopping that one, because that would be, of course, your topping action, which we wouldn't recommend. You also, of course, might have to, realize what your situation is. So perhaps this is a tree where the central leader is getting too tall, and maybe it is going to the power line, or it's getting into a shape you don't like higher up. in which case you might need to top it because it's gotten too tall. But really, we wouldn't recommend any kind of pruning it back unless there was something with it. Question of pruning older trees versus young trees. Does it have more effect not healing correctly? For both the older and the young trees, if you prune during the right time of the year, they're going to heal up properly. The only thing that you might encounter is, for instance, if you were taking a big cut on your fruit tree and say you were doing that big cut of a limb that maybe is the width of your arm, and you did that big cut maybe the end of February. So it doesn't have enough weeks to heal up and seal up properly. That would be the only caution you might see and the difference that you might have when it comes to pruning older versus younger trees. If you also found that you only had older trees and you knew that you had a lot of pruning that needed to be done, you might actually try to prune them end of December. So you don't wait until mid-February to do the pruning. You want to do it kind of right at the start of dormancy, so they have such a long period of time to heal up all of those wounds. So that would be the only thing you might have with it. You compare that to young trees, where it's a younger tree, you might be able to get away with, say, end of February, March, pruning them, compared maybe with older tree. That would be my only thing you might find. Steve asked, why no branches facing southwest? A lot of this has to do with shade, especially in our area, where some of the branches that are facing southwest tend to put on more shade or also not get enough sunlight for those other branches. So that's why they don't recommend that. There's a question of how tall is too tall for an apple tree in an open area. This is a good question, Kathy. There's not much. I think that when it comes to a tree being too tall, a lot of it would get back to where the fruit is developing. We find sometimes in Joe Davis County that there are fruit trees that are 50, 60 feet tall. And it's an open area and a lot of the fruit is very high up. And so, you're always having to try to prune closer to eye level with it. So there's really no kind of rule of thumb that a tree is too tall. It just comes down to maybe that tree is not providing you the services that you're fully expecting from that tree. It's a question of, what if I have stone fruit tree that is 5 years old that is not a bowl shape? What should I do? This really gets back to you. I think that if you have had good success with your stone fruit in whatever shape it is, if it's yielding regularly and doing really well for you, and you're pruning regularly, then that shape is fine. If it wasn't doing well, if you were finding that it just wasn't getting enough air movement to yield fruit for you and to yield a good amount of fruit, then maybe that would be getting into that fruit bowl open base shape. That would be your one strategy. Certainly, when you think about shifting a tree that is like some of our peach trees at the Rockford office, maybe over to an open bowl shape, it can be practices that you do that seem weird or unusual, where you might need to cut a central leader so that then you can create kind of that open bowl shape with it. But I would step back and say, have I gotten yields? Has the fruit been good? Have I gotten yields that are not, impacted by the weather, say? And is that shape working for me right now? You might be in an okay position to keep whatever shape you have with that. There was a question of, would a cherry tree need a peach tree for cross-pollination? Let me rephrase that. Would a cherry tree near a peach tree work for cross-pollination? So if you're growing tart cherry, if you're growing peaches, they do not need cross-pollination. They can benefit with cross-pollination, but it has to be another of the same species. So the peach trees that I have in my backyard, Reliance is one variety, Contender is another variety. They both are providing that cross-pollination, but I could get away with just having Contender or just having Reliance. So tart cherry, peaches, apricots, all of them tend to, well, I take that back. Tart cherries and peaches especially do not need cross-pollination. You can get away with one tree. But if you had another one, it could help with it. But to your question, Kyle, the cherry tree is not going to be able to cross-pollinate the peach. They're not going to help each other out. All right, any additional questions? All right. Well, thanks for joining me tonight. If you sent photos in, you'll get those photos back in the next couple of days. I'm just starting to kind of go through some of them and really appreciate you sharing those with me and allowing me to use them in tonight's presentation. If you also have additional photos you want to send my way, feel free to do so. We can talk a little bit more and I'll color those trees for you as well to kind of give you a game plan. We thank you so much for being a part of tonight's fruit tree pruning class. I hope that you are ready to go and that everything works well this pruning season. I myself have to prune in the next week or two as well.